Now, you saw this week that Chairman Benny Thompson said that there will be at least 8 public hearings starting in June, and that they will re-ask Republican lawmakers to come before the committee by week's end. You know, I'm really curious what impact you think that's going to have, considering all this new audio tape. So really, I'm asking what impact will it have on the hearings, but also on voters?
Yeah, I think that some of this is going to be a matter of timing, because on the one hand, we've seen this show before. We saw it in the second impeachment hearing, and really Democrats being able to capitalize and catalyze on a kind of energy among voters to feel very alarmed and very concerned about what's going on. On the other hand, that wasn't exactly the timing we need. So we're going to have to figure out how to find that nexus between those hearings this summer and in November. I think the critical thing for folks when looking to those hearings is, can Democrats make the case, and can never Trump Republicans like Cheney and Kinzinger make the case that they're connecting the urgency of the January 6th committee hearings with what should be done? And that means thinking about ways to talk about the urgency and the crisis that our democracy faces, while also showing what they're going to do about it. Democrats want to know, voters rather, excuse me, want to know, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And that's where we've got to sync those two things up.
Yeah. But even in syncing those things up, Rosa, I mean, it just feels to me like it's very dangerous to have, the GOP has particularly become right-wing extremists. Like, there is no separation between the two. What do you think, in your opinion, is the danger of having right-wing extremists potentially take control of the legislative branch of this government if they take back the House and the Senate?
So there goes the neighborhood, right? I mean, that's it for American democracy. And I think that's actually the most frightening thing of all about these audio tapes. I would feel a little better if the Kevin McCarthys of the world just hadn't realized what was going on. Then I think, gee, we've got a problem. We've got a bunch of dimwits in the Republican Party. But knowing that they're not dimwits, they knew perfectly well what was going on. They knew it was wrong. They knew it was dangerous. And in the time since then, they have chosen to ally themselves with those extremists. That's actually the most frightening thing of all.
And I wonder if people are even paying attention at this point, to your point, Rosa. And Roland, look, we know here in the Beltway, folks like all of us on this screen, we consume the minutia of what's happening. I kind of feel like people across America tune out. They just want to know, when are people going to be held accountable? Do you think that the public hearings will penetrate this layer of, I'm exhausted, I don't even want to be bothered with it anymore, and have an impact on midterm elections?
Hell no, because it's too damn late. Democrats have been playing around. There's this great scene from the show Scandal where Joe Morton plays Papa Pope and Kerry Washington's Olivia Pope, and he literally says, you're skipping around in a field of bombs and mistaking them for daisies. That's Democrats. They have been playing this game and dragging this thing along, doing it quietly. And you know what people are talking about? They're talking about inflation. They're talking about food prices. And so what they have not done is properly connect these people with power. This is about power. This is about control. And so you have to say, if these people were willing to do that for power, what do you think they're going to do when they take control? And so their messaging sucks, okay? They have not pushed it properly. It has not been top of mind. You have to connect the dots. They have been horrible at doing that. So fine, you're going to have hearings, but then how are you going to say, if you allow these people to get back in power, they're going to pass laws that will be a detriment to you? They have to be able to make that argument. It is not a question of just how you do it in a hearing. It's how do you do it every single day in every congressional district. And so I don't have hope that Democrats, frankly, know how to message, because they simply have not proven they can.
Roland, you have got to learn how to form an opinion. I think we're all very clear on how you feel. And I echo those concerns. But even, Roland, if they don't pay attention, even if Democrats' messaging is, not the best, as you say, there's still a responsibility on citizens, right? And so I want to play this clip of Rand Paul literally sounding like Vladimir Putin. Take a listen.
You could also argue the countries they've attacked were part of Russia.
Well,
we're part of the Soviet Union.
Yes, and I firmly disagree with that proposition. It is the fundamental right of these countries to decide their own future and their own destiny. And
I'm not saying it's not, but I'm
important.
saying that the countries that have been attacked, Georgia and Ukraine, were part of the Soviet Union.
And that does not give
they were
Russia
part
any
of
right
the
to attack
Soviet
them.
Union since the 1920s.
But that does not give Russia the right to attack them.
Rosa, he was literally sounding like Vladimir Putin on that stand. So we've already talked about the danger of domestic politics should the GOP take back the House. But I'm curious your thoughts on the global stage, what message this will send to other world leaders that you have Republicans sounding like a dictator.
Yeah, well, we've had Republicans sounding like dictators for a while now, of course, but if we have, I think that's been just more and more normalized in the last few years. I mean, when Trump sounded like Putin, at least for a little while, everybody said, "Oh my God, that's strange, that's disturbing." We've now reached a point when mainstream Republican leaders can sound like Putin and nobody even bats an eyelash because that's what we expect. You know, I think that if the House was controlled by the Republicans, the Senate was controlled by Republicans both, at this moment, it's not clear to me that the U.S. would be sending assistance to Ukraine in the way it is. It's not clear to me. I think that the resurgence of the populist far right that we have seen in Europe, that was just barely batted down, for instance, in the French election a couple weeks ago when Macron won, I think that would be very different. I think we'd be looking at a much more severe threat from the far right. I think that Ukraine would be toast at this point if the Republicans were in full control of Congress, and I think that is what people have to look forward to if voters are not paying enough attention to make sure that the Republicans do not retake Congress. And unfortunately, I think Roland is probably right that we're going to watch the hearings in June with attention. We're going to say, "Oh my God, that's awful." And it might be that many Republicans would say the same thing if they watch the hearings, but they won't.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you kind of have to wrap these things in like scripted series, Lucy, and like force feed the American people because you have like Netflix and Peacock and all these streaming services begging for your attention. I just don't know if people will pay that level of attention to these hearings. But I am curious your thoughts as well to have, you know, a party you once belonged to now sounding like people who this country once considered an enemy.
Well, the road to hell is paved in wishy-washy meh intentions, right? And so I think that we can look back, and you've made this point to me before, we can look back and see, well, they were always kind of sounding a little bit like that. But I think that the lesson for Democrats is keep your eyes on the prize. I mean, we look at some of the news coverage this week of people like Madison Cawthorn or Marjorie Taylor Greene. I am unfortunately sorry to say those people are still going to be in Congress next year, right? Those are in people who are in R plus gazillion districts when we look at the PVI of those districts. So we need to focus on the districts that we are not hearing about, right? The swing districts, the R plus 2 or 3, the D plus 2 or 3, where Democrats are really, really in trouble. And we need to think about those districts because the big problem that Democrats have now is that the American people do not buy into most of Democrats' messaging that every Republican in their life is a villain, right? They don't feel like their local city councilman or their local, Republican county chair is a villain. And so Democrats have really failed to connect those villains, right? The Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, the Madison Cawthorns of the world, the Sedition Caucus folks with the folks that they're sending to Congress, the 435 members of Congress. So that is going to be really key. And that's the opportunity of these hearings. It's for Democrats to make the case that what is being described or what happened on January 6th, that the buck stops with your member of Congress, with your Secretary of State, with your governor.